Okay, so this first one, right from the start of the film, there is a very personal and home movie document feel to it, a raw grassroots aesthetic which draws the viewer into that world which is so engaging. So I think this is for you, Dr. Castle. How did you manage to collect all the various archival footage for the example of the survival school lessons?
That that was probably a 2 or 3 year journey in and of itself. But I think what is cool and powerful, and it tells you a whole lot about filmmaking and the history of the world in general, is that to get the most powerful images of Native women and kids, we had to go into the archival when they were powerful in the 70s, and not a lot of the stuff you see in films today, and sort of the new wave of documentary where there's a lot of verite ideas where people are typically, it's like, imagine your day and someone following you around with a camera. It's not super awesome, right? It's not the story that it typically ends up being that kind of sad story of poverty or whatever other stereotypes get associated with folks. So the archival was such a find. And then the thing about it is you can't find archival material of Indigenous women and kids by looking up Indigenous women and kids in the Google and it goes pop, pop, pop. You have to be you have to be a sleuth. You have to search in the places where things get forgotten. And I think that's part of what the whole film is about too, is trying to layer by layer tell this unknown history that once you know it, it just transforms a lot about how you look at the world. So I really like that you saw that in the film, and the way in which it's, the grassroots aesthetic is called like keeping it real. Like, and we have a long enough relationship with you and, Madonna and Marcy, all of us have known each other for a long time. So part of it is just getting back to how do you find the comfort level in a filming experience where people truly trust you. And you can get back to like who they really are, and they can show that on camera.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask Madonna to share during those years of survival school. How is it that filming of the survival school was even happening?
Oh, gee. Let's see, what can I remember? Things were happening constantly. There was things going on all the time. So it wasn't just a daily routine of going to class and teaching. No, it wasn't like that at all. It was daily living and stuff. There was many things going on with the American Indian movement. So we were involved in that as a group. We weren't really a school. That's just a name. We were more like a group. And so we were involved in whatever was going on. So there was a lot of times filming crews were coming in from different parts of the world, as well, a few from the United States, but mostly from Europe, other places that were interested in what was happening, in Indian country, what was happening. And since Wounded Knee in '73, the standoff with the United States military, I mean, that was a big thing for them, especially the ones I think in Europe or wherever. So a lot of times they would get referred to us. They'd go to Rapid City or go, to some organization, but AIM happening or group or something, or talk to an individual, and then they'd refer them to us. That happened a lot of times. So, I'd get a call, and back in the old days, a landline, and they say, well, so-and-so is going to come down and they want to talk to you. And so that's how a lot of that happened. But for example, the ones where they were on the, we were at a treaty meeting on the Yankton Reservation, southeast part of the state of South Dakota, and it was a international treaty meeting, and we were there, and a couple of the local, I think Richard Hoover, he worked with the defense committee, the legal defense committee, and then Paul Smith is, they were into doing media, I guess, or filming anyway. So they did some of that. So it was basically this kind of like, it just happened, It wasn't really planned, any of it.
Okay, on to the next question. The sharing of these vivid experiences and the storytelling of one of the most significant times in Indigenous activism and by some of the leaders in that movement, what was it like to bring together and facilitate the talking circle you show on film with Madonna Thunder Hawk and Marcy Gilbert? Or having all these strong women together in one room on camera, looking relaxed and talking with such ease? How did that come about? That'd be for you, Dr. Castle.
Yeah, I'm thinking about smart answers to that, where I'm like, trickery. I know, instead of all this pontification about non-extractive filmmaking, it's really basic. You develop relationships with people and you stay accountable to them. And then you try to do your best. It's actually interesting. It's not a remotely radical idea to put Native women around a table, to put women around a table, but especially Indigenous women around in a circle to talk, but it's still a pretty radical idea in a lot of ways for documentary film, because we have that notion of like the individual who's the expert, right? A lot of things we decided not to do in this film, because what we wanted is to let all that fall away so that the real expertise is there, right? In the experiences of women. And Christina King, who you'll hear from, is the co-director, really came in with the powerful idea of trying to create a space where the background kind of falls away. So we're in this black box space, the background falls away. But a big part of it was just the ability for you all as family to make that space work. And to whatever degree you could, and that's the thing, you can tell us whether, how difficult it was to sort of forget the 5 cameras that were, in your face enough to be, as close as you can to sort of having a conversation amongst yourselves that we're actually sort of a part of as the audience, and not like, we're looking in, but we're not, it's not the voyeur thing where you're from another place looking in. But that's part of what happens when you develop relationships. You stay accountable, and you all are involved in it too. At least that's what I hope. And you can tell me now whether that worked or not.
Well, as I remember, when we were getting ready to do that,
Yeah,
it was kind of interesting. We were looking around, never saw anything like that before, and it was just kind of exciting, because there was that those the artwork, those wooden whatever artwork on the wall, and that was all interesting first. So we were kind of like in awe, of the whole thing. But also, I think because we're family, we also, this is the bottom line. It was unspoken, is that you're doing this for the generations that are coming. We finally get a chance to do our own media stuff. It's our own voice, our own words. So we understood that without having to be told or explained, that our great grandkids are going to be looking at this, and they'll know us, through that. So I think that really helped a lot, .
I think also by this time we've had cameras in our face and in our lives long enough to, not be intimidated by them and just feel comfortable. It wasn't something that happened right away, and I think if it did, we may not have been as comfortable as we were in that part of the in that circle of visiting. Plus, it gave the older ones the opportunity to remember, to bounce conversations off each other and spark memories, and that was really really important, I think.
Well, and just so folks know, we had 2 full days of that, and we saw just a tiny bit of it. So we've been, even though it's like 5 cameras and all the different microphones and putting it all together, but the full, we're going to be using the rest of those interviews, certainly so that it's available to family, it's going to be part of things. But that's one of the things we're trying to push with our filmmaking or media making in general, is who you're making it for and how you make sure it gets to those people and, gets used that way. So it's going to be cool to see what the rest of it is, because it is pretty amazing. We just showed a tiny bit of it. So, wow.
Okay, so next question. In Warrior Women, Madonna talks about the forced removal of children from their families and their placement in federal missionary boarding schools for assimilation, such a destructive force of colonization in separating people from their land. Similar colonial policies happened here in so-called Australia to Aboriginal people. What are some of the challenges to reconnect the people back to the land, in particular food sovereignty and access to traditional food sources?
So that's for the 2 of you.
Okay, the first part is for is it is that reference to years ago, when I was first in
Yeah.
school, or okay.
It's reference to missionary and boarding schools and the assimilation process. And the question is, what are some of the challenges to reconnect the people back to the land?
Well, okay, going back, yeah, it was federal policy. In the United States, up until 1934, indigenous people, our ancestors, our people were all under the War Department of the United States. So there wasn't anything about actual education or anything on that level. It was more like assimilation and acculturation, and genocide. So after the 30s, the Indian Reorganization Act, things changed from what I learned from my mother. Like when she was in a boarding school system back in the late 20s and during the 30s, it was military control. So they had early 30s. That was what they wore uniforms and that type of thing. But after the 1935 or so, the educational system dramatically changed for her. And she, for example, she ended up being a tennis champion. There's no record of it, but she was 14 years old, and their tennis team at the Flandreau Indian School in South Dakota, they played, for example, the women's, what do they call it? Olympic team for practice. The Olympic team played tennis with them for practice because they were so good. But you won't see a record of that anywhere. I mean, those are the kinds of things that happened after the Indian Reorganization Act, when they took all our people out from under the War Department and created the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So that changed. So they weren't no longer flogged and things like that, you know. A lot of the students, when they ran away, their head was still shaved, and there were still boarding schools within the religious organizations like the Catholics and the Episcopalians. They had a partnership with the United States government to colonize and you know our people. But after the 30s, there was a you know difference. So we when I went to boarding school, we didn't have the severe military, more of like concentration camp types education. We were actually taught, but it was still, we were still you know taught to be, you know, white Americans, not native. You know, we weren't allowed to speak English. I mean, speak our languages. We had to speak English, all of that type of thing. But there was still a major separation of family, and that's what we're dealing with today. The results of that is today is the separation that took place. So yeah, it's a difficult, really a difficult um, work that to try to see to return our attention to the land, because since those days of the 30s and the 40s, 50s on up, the land use through the Bureau of Indian Affairs has changed from families living on lands that their traditional land has changed now to leasing the land out, you know, in sections and fencing it all off and leasing it to you know, white Indians that have a number that so they can say they're tribal members, or non-native leasers, land leasers, and put our people in housing, cluster housing. So they're removed off of their lands where their parents grew up and stuff. So we have that separation now, and so it's a hard thing, but it's, you know, colonization. You know, it's the residuals of that is we're still in a survival mode because of that. And the
So
food, Mars.
yeah, so what I would like to add to that is, because of that history and the government policies that came into play, all the efforts to remove our people from our land, um, it was changing our belief systems, and part of that was done in the military schools, the missionaries, and the boarding schools, by separating the family. Then the children are not being taught a value system or belief system, and then forced into Christianity, where we were, you know, the belief system of Christianity is that we are less than, and so we're born in sin, and so right from the get-go, we are not worthy. And the darker your skin is, the more true that is, according to Christianity. And the other thing that Christianity teaches is that the land, nothing's alive except you. And so that belief system sets the all the rest of the natural world, all that's living in the natural world, therefore does not exist and is not meaningful. And so once that idea is out there, then, you know, according to Christianity, you can use the earth up if you want to. You can use up any of the natural resources because that's God's plan or whatever. So the ideologies of our spirit, of, you know, Christianity, the religion of Christianity, and then our spirituality are total opposites. So, you know, if you have however many generations, 3, 4, 5 generations of forced Christianity, and your whole families are being, you know, taught that that's how you pray and that's how you believe, then, you know, we're looking at generations of people who have that belief system and trying to, you know, bring back our spirituality and bring back that ideology that all life is alive and deserves respect. And most importantly, that as human beings on this planet, we are less than all natural life. And according to our creation history and our spirituality, we are less than the natural world. And that, I mean, I could go on and on with that, but so you see the dilemma there of trying to convince, or at least not convince, but to remind our people of who we were meant to be and where we come from and what our belief systems are. And there's a lot of confusion around that because, you know, because of the system of colonization and the taking of our spirituality and prayer. But also on the political side, like my mother talked about the Bureau of Indian Affairs, they control, they make the decisions according to how we get to be on our land, when we get to be on it, how we can use it, all that. So there's a lot of policies in place where we can't just go out and build a house where my grandmother lived. We have to go through the BIA and now the you know, the Indian Reorganization Act that developed tribal councils now that are you know, smaller versions of the United States government. We have to go through them as well. And so there's systems in place that prevent us from using our lands the way we want to, the way we need to. And because of those systems, the priorities are on economic value. So for our people, for our reservation where we're living right now, we have ranch land. And so the ranchers get priority because it's income for the tribe and for those of us who lease our land. And so, but the thing about that is because the ranchers are priority, they're able to come in and do, you know, lease land for 5 years at a time. And sometimes they're leasing lands for 50, 60, 70 years. And so they're allowed to come in and change the landscape to a certain extent. And part of that affects our wild foods. And I know for our people here, one of our wild foods is cattail. And there used to be a lot of cattail up here, but now we can't hardly find it because of the constant ranching of cows on our land. And the cows come from somewhere else. So they bring whatever is in their guts, they bring that here and dump it all over our lands, and then they're gone. And then the next year they bring a bunch of cows from somewhere else and do the same thing. And so our foods have suffered because of these policies related to economic value rather than human value. And I believe that food is a human right. I think it's a human right, right? I mean, we should be able to feed ourselves and we should have access to our foods. So it falls into a very cumbersome political realm to access our right to our own foods. And so again, it's another issue and an issue that requires a lot of work. Next question. Any more? Anybody want to say anything else?
No, we got lots of questions, so.
Okay, so your film reveals the intimate connection Madonna has with her traditional lands, and in particular the Missouri River, which of course has been the focus in recent years with the NODAPL pipeline and water protectors movement as it came to a head at Standing Rock. Madonna certainly gives an insight to that important relationship to the environment as she speaks in the film about her early memories of gathering wild foods by the river. The bitter sweetness of her story really builds a picture of the vitalness of land and water activism. So can you tell us how important was Standing Rock to the movement and to engaging a new generation of First Nations women?
Well, you know, from my many years of doing this basic, you know, responsibility is what it is of survival on all these different levels. Um, I think that it was, geez, it's kind of hard to, for me anyway, to try to talk in one, you know, one area, one specific about it, because everything else is involved in all of it. Our issues do not change. Water, our struggle for our water rights, we have the water rights, we have that, but to keep it, to to hold the United States government and all their agencies feet to the fire to obey their own laws has been on us. So for years back, you know, we've had different federal laws that are statutory. So they're you know, they're basically as permanent as you can get in this country for any kind of a law, where we have inherent rights to the water. And a lot of it came, those laws came because of our treaty rights. So you know, it's a big, complicated story, you know, world that we're constantly standing, you know, we have to constantly be struggling for just to maintain. That's the way I look at it, to maintain what we have. So it's really hard to articulate one specific issue. And because, like I said, our issues do not change. We're land-based people in this country. We're the only ones in this country that are land-based. People own property. They don't pay their property taxes. They're out of here. You know, we have ratified treaty rights with the United States government that guarantees our land base what we have left. Okay. So we are the only land-based people in this country. But that doesn't mean that, you know, we can kick back and just relax. We're constantly in the crosshairs of mining company, you name it, whoever, Nestle, international corporation that's gobbling up everybody's water. You know, they're looking at our water resources besides the mining companies. So we're constantly in the crosshairs of every corporation, every extraction corporation, and even the politics of the federal government. So we're constantly, you know, standing in vigil. And so a lot of our young people, they hear this growing up, whether their parents or their families actively involved in any kind of resistance, or if they're just being colonized. I mean, the fact is they hear this talk, they hear these issues about these issues. So that's why something like Standing Rock could happen, where everybody dropped everything and headed up there, because we know that that's basic to who we are. So I feel a lot personal now. This is just personal, you know, how I feel is that you learn by doing. And because our people, we are still in the belly of the beast here, and we're outnumbered and all of that, and we know that. So our young people, I think our ancestral memory kicks in, and we know right away to stand our ground. So many of the young people, we as elders it's our responsibility to let them know that we have their back. That's our responsibility now. We did all in the young years, we did what we could. And we, stood the line in our day. Now it's their turn. And they have to learn tactics. They have to learn and understand what it means for survival on all levels for us. They have to learn the same way we did when we were young. And that's what makes you strong. We don't need to be laying out strategy and all of that for this young generation. They've got the youth and they've got their ancestral memory and they have their ancestors. So that, they'll do what they gotta do and they'll do a good job.
Marcy, do you want to, I don't know, there's something I wanted to say from a film context to that, unless you wanted to go right, unless you want to respond right now. I mean, one of the things that's really, because right now, there's so much going on in the world, but when we think of like the flow of the film, one of the things that was happening by that time is like we made a version of the film that was just a lot about both of you trying to figure out, who's going to carry this on, because there wasn't a galvanizing fundamental event like Standing Rock that had happened. And, it was like when Standing Rock happened, first of all, a lot of this stuff and most of what we do and what you do is like, bring this is like the first time people are learning this for the rest of the world, right? Like it's new to them. And it's new to some folks, who, as you said, part of it is like over the years, Madonna, you've been asked a million times, the same set of questions, for good reason. But it's so interesting how over time, part of it is just like, learning that, yeah, no matter what, people still have to go through it. Like there's only so much that you give, that you've done, that was your time. And just the notion of like survivors of unrecognized genocide in the belly of a beast. And now the beast is so, you can't hide from the beast anymore, right? Like, even though it's in the daily lives of so many people who see it and experience it, so there's a whole lot of rest of the population going, of course, coming to you and going, what do we do? And you're like, you just, stop the madness yourself, in your own community, start there. But just the power of, what it is to realize that you're part of the problem and how many privileges you have, and just what you can do to actually help the folks to stand by the incredible power of folks who have managed to survive and still bring like the thing that might save the world. So, and you have absolutely no obligation to give this knowledge to anybody other than you're like, you just need to get in line and join in the fight. And yeah, women are inherently powerful. And if you haven't figured that out, that's on you, in terms of, just like you can join it. We're not going to explain it all the time. But it was just powerful because when Standing Rock happened, just in that way, like it fired us all, it fired the film up again. Like it gave the film a chance to go into the stuff that has always been the challenge from like the first time listening to all these oral histories that come from all of the, women who have done so much. But it was like, how do we show that fire, that like power, instead of it's like, we got to see memories in action. So Standing Rock was important in that way. But now it's like, it's been a few years. So we're back in this, the next part of the cycle, and there's another pipeline and it never ends. And it's the same thing. But just like people say with the film, it's like just a little bit more, like it just lifts a little bit each generation, like Marcy says in the film. And, it's just powerful that you're all still willing to talk to people and answer the same questions, and each time it makes a difference though. That's why it's like, it's powerful. And every time I'm over here taking notes, learning something new, so, if I could do this for 22 years, and and still be this excited. No, but it's just, and that's the thing, is like the power, the inherent power, indigenous power of protecting the responsibilities of the land, you know, all of this, like it's a worldview revolution. Like we either change and follow, or we do die. I got excited over here. I couldn't help it. Sorry. I wanted to.
That's a good segue into the next question. This is for Madonna and for Marcy. What were their thoughts about the global rise of environmentalism, and how is that impacting Indian communities?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I think the answers to the question about Standing Rock is it's a good Standing Rock is a good example of people coming together and helping each other out, you know, building allies. And so I think one of the things that was really impactful about Standing Rock is social media. I mean, social media connected the world. And like my mom was talking about, young people taking it on and going forward. And so a lot of young people were empowered because of Standing Rock, and not just native, not just indigenous people, but young people all over the world. And so I think the fact that we in this time, in this very uncertain time, you know, the future of the planet is in our hands. And I think the young people have realized that this is real, this is important, this is affecting them in a way that has never affected humankind ever. And so everybody has common ground, and that common ground is the desire to live. And in order for us to do that, we have to protect the planet, and we have to speak up for the planet. And so I think it for our young people, it was an empowerment that they felt to the core of their being, because we're related to we understand our relationship to the land. And there's over the, you know, since the movement, since the American Indian movement, you know, shined light on all kinds of you know, all kinds of issues. One of the things that the movement did is revitalized our spirituality. And since that time, more and more of our young people have taken that path. And so when, you know, when Standing Rock happened, I think young people were like, holy crap, this is real. It affects everybody. And that was the message at Standing Rock. We weren't just there to protect water just for us. And that was a clear fact that the media, anybody, scientists, all that, they could come and say, well, yeah, if you pollute this water, it's only going to affect the native people who live downstream. That, you know, that's totally false. It affected anybody living downstream. And something as simple as that brought it to light that this issue of destroying the planet cannot happen. And so young people, you know, I think it was the perfect storm for young people to become empowered and find their light in their desire to live.
Oh, what happened? Oh,
Look at that.
yeah.
Okay, next question. Warrior Women also highlights the indigenous women's movement in Turtle Island in the early years from the late 60s onward as the Women of AIM and Women of All Red Nations, such an inspirational and critical time during the movement for equality and land rights. But how do these communities fare today in the current political climate as we see a resurgence with actions like Land Back and MMIW?
Go ahead, Mars.
I could say something.
Go ahead, you go first.
I mean, one of the things that happens in decolonizing history, since like history is, all our systems intersect to erase truth and shift perspectives. One of the ways that when, we talked about this where you revise a history, well, we haven't even told this history yet. So part of it is the way in which a lot of when this happens, you're usually you look at it through that perspective of patriarchy instead of understanding it through an indigenous perspective of, we're not looking at this in the context of a colonizing women's history, right, or white women's history. And so just even understanding the power of women of all red nations, which naturally in a patriarchy, that story takes a secondary role to aim. And we have no desire to do this like comparative model of like who's in the hierarchy, who's better, who's more important. But the true history of what Warren represents is this, true history of the inherent balance and power of indigenous communities. And so we can use words like matriarchy in ways that don't set people off like it did 20 years ago, because it's so political. And so, for a lot of people, it's new to them to see the natural, just to see women running things, right? They didn't see it at the time, but it was happening, and it wasn't happening as like a power over. And I was just looking at it from all the pressure I've seen over the years of interacting with all the institutions that we're trying to break down and climb through and throw out and redo the story. And that's, I think, what part of what Warrior Women Project is doing, and doing it collectively. And it's so important because that's where this power is now.
I think when we talk about how, the question about how do these communities fare today, what I see is we are just as powerful, if not more, because of the work that happened in the 60s and 70s. The knowledge is available, easily available. It can be taught in our tribal colleges, and especially with social media. The information is readily available, but also our communities are way more educated now, and we understand that we have, we really do have a place in this world. And so when you look at our communities, we have Native people that are fully participating in all walks of life, whether it's political or spiritual or whatever it is. We have, in the state of South Dakota, we have 5 Native people in the state, within the state government. And so our issues are being heard on a broader scale, and in within those arenas that we didn't have access to before. And so with the Land Back and the MMIW, both for MMIW, that is a clear example of patriarchy at its worst. And Also the way that our people have been wiped away from history, where we have become invisible, and that can be perpetuated because of the hate that is being perpetuated through the U.S. government's history of our people and the stereotypes of our people, all of that. And so MMIW, what's happening to our indigenous women is hatred through a patriarchal society. And that's why it continues now. And that's why our women are targeted the most, because of hate. And so that's just another, that's MMIW is finally has the light that it deserves, but it's a historical situation that has been ongoing since the invasion of our lands. It's not something new. And so because we have Indian people in the arena, the political arenas or whatever arenas that exist out there, who are fully functioning and participating in those areas, these kinds of things can come to light. And with the land back issue, that's just another method of shining light on our relationship with the United States government. Another way to remind them of their relationship that they wanted. We didn't go to them asking for treaties. They came to us. And the reason why they came to us is because they knew they could not wipe us out. And our warriors were kicking their butt. And so they were like, oh, we're not going to be able to kill these people. In fact, they're killing us. So let's do something else. And so Land Back is providing, again, shining light on that relationship and the responsibilities that the United States government put upon themselves. And so, we're just, again, reminding them of their own laws and their own agreements and their own humanity. Next question. As First Nations filmmakers, how important is it to be the creatives of this kind of storytelling and be in control of the narrative?
Well, I would answer that from the co-directing filmmaking position by being just really clear about the fact that I'm someone who has Native heritage. I have ancestors. I have an ancestor in particular, but I don't define myself. I don't identify as an Indigenous woman. But also, but it's a space where, since it's Native, non-Native is the framework, I have an obligation to talk about what I think is important overall in anything that involves extractive knowledge or erasing, which is what's happened, especially with filmmaking or research or the production and knowledge about Indigenous people, is that I am part of both communities. I'm responsible in both ways. And so I think it's absolutely critical. And if you can do what we did in the film, which is have, indigenous creative thinking and creatives like Christina King as a Native filmmaker, and what I bring to the film in terms of the long history of accountability, I think all of these things need to happen. And as we move forward, it's something that is important for folks, because as we've discussed, it's a process to find yourself often. So, part of what I want people to see is the ways in which they have accountability to their own Indigenous roots from wherever they are, but you don't have to pretend to be something else, which is what happens sometimes in filmmaking and other spaces. But I think it makes a difference when you see, you know, us even talking together, or if you saw, you know, more people involved with this, that it is just about accountability and transparency. What I say. I don't know what you all think. Well, I do, but I'm not going to say it. Can't talk all the time. I'm going to talk over you the whole time. White.
You fake white woman.
It's the truth. I can't fool you guys.
Well, I'm not one of the filmmakers, but I think what I got out of this experience is the fact that we were allowed to be involved in part of the process, and we were consulted in a meaningful way, and nothing was assumed, and if there were any assumptions, they were brought to our attention. So I think that's an important part about creating film with live, you know, like warrior women, is that we were allowed to be part of the filmmaking, even though we, you know, we weren't the actual producers or directors.
Oh, we heard grandkid.
Well, you know what? My main point about the whole thing was, because of my age and the years that all the way back to the 60s, where we never had Native press, Native media, Native anything. So to me, this was so important, because the main thing was that it was real Native people involved. And it wasn't someone else writing a script for us to act out with our brown faces. It was us. It was individually, it was us, you know, and it was our doing. And nowadays, with the social media and everything else going on in this modern day world, I don't think the younger people understand or even realize the importance of that, what they can do now and what they are doing as far as media. And it's just amazing. But for me and my age and what I've seen all these decades, is, to me, it's just amazing that I lived to be a part of where I was always complaining in those in the movement. We called it the movement back in the day, was that, you know, we would, when are we going to be able to write our own stories, write our own books, do our own media, you know? Maybe someday that'll happen, you know, but in the meantime, we're fighting for, you know, keep the uranium miners out of the Black Hills, you know? You got to pick your battles, you know? But that was always kind of like on the wish list. And here it is, we have it. So I'm so thankful that I got to be part of that.
I think one more thing I want to add to that is because we got to be involved to some extent, I saw the hardships that the directors had to go through when seeking funding, because the people who were providing the funding had their own ideas of what this film should be about, and who needs to be involved, and like that. So I saw the directors really fight hard for what they wanted in the film, and who they wanted in the film, and how they wanted to, you know. And I heard how you know, different ones in the film industry, and the people who fund film, you know, say comments like, oh, well, that's never going to work, like the black box situation where we're all visiting and stuff. They're like, why is that in there? You know, they didn't like it and all that kind of stuff. So I think the directors deserve a lot of credit, because they they held on to their film. And I saw the struggles that Beth had to go through to make sure that her work wasn't exploited and her work wasn't ignored or, you know, belittled or whatever. And so I think that to me was really important, that she stood her ground no matter how hard it got. And so in order to control the narrative, or to make sure that the narrative was where she wanted it to be, not where the funders wanted it to be, or any outsiders who you know, think they know film, about, especially about Indigenous people. So I just wanted to say that because I saw the struggles that Dr. Castle had to go through.
Well, I think too, just the fact, like when you say, I just think about the fact that, you know, no matter how things go, we're always trying to change a system. We should be trying to change the systems we're in, you know, and, you know, we're trying to blow them up when we can, but we can't always blow it up and rebuild it at this very same time. But the thing that always drives me and that I hold on to is, not only am I responsible to the two of you, but we're collectively responsible. But this has always not been about me. It's always been bigger than me. And it's not just about us either. Like, we have the responsibilities to all the people whose stories that this is standing in for, representing, and now pushing us to learn more about. So that's the only challenge in sort of like why accountability is so important, and figuring out what that is and what your community actually is. We say community a lot. What does that mean? And who does hold you accountable? And those things are all really important as we figure out how to do better work being, you know, accountable in Indigenous communities, and not have those just be fancy words, you know, but how you really walk your talk. And so that was part of it. Like, even when I was scared too, where I was like, oh, I don't know, could I say this to Madonna? I'm like, I know I'm going to get my face melted, but I need to say it because it's a responsibility, you know, like the hard stuff, like trying to decide what's in that film, you know, as being part of the family. I wanted to protect things at certain times. And then I realized, like, it's not so much protecting it, it's just the, you know, that all of it's human relationships, and like, what are your goals and what's your worldview and what are you accountable to? And I use that word a lot, but I mean it. And I just think that's something I want to see it happen all over the world as we do things. You can have allies and partnerships, and be aware as you go through it. But, you know, like Madonna just said, you know, you can tell your own story now in ways that you couldn't before. And that's part of like what we're trying to do with Warrior Women Project, which is bigger than the film and is ongoing, is help people do that, you know, and get more stories and get it out there. But we've been talking quite a long time. We might be sick of ourselves. I don't know.
Yeah, let's quit now.
I know exactly when she's ready to go.
This is the last question. Well, actually, it's the next question. I think we already answered it. It was, you know, what's the message of these elders to the next generation? I think we talked about that already, right?
Guys, yeah.
Okay, so the last question is, for the communities of Marcy and Madonna, and from what you are aware of, how has COVID-19 impacted the movement and actions of these warrior women?
Who wants to answer that?
Someone else. I don't understand the question.
We could answer the last question, the very last one, because I think this is.
Yeah, isn't that the last one?
No, the one more is just, it says that there feels like there's so much more that can be said about the women of the Red Power movement from the past and their legacy today. Would there be any chance of a sequel or even a Warrior Women series?
No.
Yes. Could see it live. Yes.
You know where the sequel is all they got to do is follow the movements that are active right now.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all over the place. The legacy of Women of All Red Nations is the MMIW movement. the water protectors, you know, they're all over. They're in action right now. So that's the sequel. The sequel is happening right now.
Well, and that's the thing is like, so this is, you know, we're connecting to that which, you know, the country, the colonizing space known as Australia and other places in like Pacific Island. But
Yeah.
just like, I would love to support and gather with other women who want to see this done to create a, you know, a global warrior women series, you know,
Yeah.
because that is
Wow, that would be
happening all
amazing.
over the world.
That was equal.
Yeah. I mean,
That's
you know,
awesome.
the Warrior Women sequel will do the, you know, it'll be a big long blooper reel of Madonna Thunder Hawk just going, are we done yet?
I was just gonna say, but what about the blooper reel?
I know.
Promises.
Promises. I know. Broken promises. Uh-oh, I'm exposed. But yeah, I would love to. I think we should support the Warrior Women series globally. And I think whoever's listening to this, you know, I certainly have no desire to be, you know, the mad woman in control of that. But I would love to share the responsibility with other people who would like to do that, because this is the power and we need to know each other. And even with all the social media, we still have a tendency, and this is the thing too, I'll say, like we've taken this film to Sami land in Finland, and there isn't a place that we've been where Indigenous folks don't say that is my experience. And, you know, and we know this more and more, and, you know, it's, you know, the world's on fire, and, you know, we can do something about it.